I want to bring my panel in now to talk about this. Let's touch upon that if we can, Dana. This is a big week for Donald Trump to look outside of the U.S., which politically is a welcome idea for those around him.
That's right. Well, first of all, he'll have some more meetings with international leaders, heads of state here. But then the biggie is at the end of the week when he himself will travel on a pretty big international trip. He's going to go to Saudi Arabia. He's going to go to Israel. He's going to go to Brussels, and he's going to meet the Pope at the Vatican. And it's going to be, a lengthy trip and probably a very nice reprieve from kind of rattling around inside the White House, where he has had, difficulty after difficulty, a lot of self-imposed crises, I should say. But it's going to be a completely different ballgame. And you've seen him already today try to pivot, not just with this important meeting that he had with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, but on a completely different note, speaking to police officers at the Police Officer Memorial, looking and sounding so much more conventional and presidential than we have seen and heard him, particularly over the last week, where it's been very rough.
And we are, I should say, waiting for the White House briefing. It's actually running a little later than normal even, so that should begin any moment now. But Nia, I wonder what you think, because Dana brought up this appearance before police officers today. President Trump was very welcome there. Going overseas, is he going to get that affirmation that it seems like folks who are in his corner feel like he really needs right now as he's under fire?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine that he'll get the kind of welcome that President Obama got when he had his first overseas trips, and even when he was a candidate. He was kind of greeted there at some big events, 200,000 people showing up at some of his events as he was campaigning. And you've already heard from some of these countries people wanting to protest, right? And you saw even when Donald Trump was elected, you saw sort of international protests. So it's hard to imagine that he'll be greeted in the way that President Obama was greeted. And this is a really high stakes trip for him. We heard from the White House that he's prepping for it. He's got to be on his game. He's got to obviously study for the different events. It's not just about presentation in the way that some events out of the White House are. I think you've got to be on sort of gaffe patrol in terms of looking to see how he's going to present himself, and also what he's going to learn from these trips, right? We've had this president, right, who in his meetings with foreign leaders will often come back and say
he does seem to have a lesson learned.
Yeah, he's
with the Chinese premier.
Exactly, exactly. With President Xi, that conversation taught him something in terms of his interaction with North Korea and how powerful China was. So that'll be interesting to see what he learns from these engagements.
So big week with this trip. Big week when it comes to the firing of James Comey. Were there tapes of their conversations? Were there not? We don't know. And then all of this happening as we wait for this White House briefing here, Laura Coates, as you have the government arguing before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on President Trump's travel ban. Just catch us up on that, because we're going to see some of that discussed in this briefing.
Now remember, the Ninth Circuit is Trump's favorite circuit in all of the world. He's talked about it a great deal as being a very credible and being very facetious here.
I was just going to say, sarcasm.
Sarcasm big and wide here. And what's happening now is the balancing act that we've seen over the past couple months. Whether or not the president's prerogative and right to enforce laws based on national security interests will override our concerns about religious freedom and religious establishment clause. And so the courts are always balancing this and saying, listen, is a rose by any other name? We believe it may be a Muslim ban based on your campaign rhetoric and things that were reprieved.
But that's really the issue, right? Is a judge found that you can see essentially the motive behind the travel ban when you look at what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail. And we listened today to hear the government argue that that's really not something you can consider, and they were trying to pull out case after case and try to argue, right?
And the reason for that is because it's a very slippery slope. How far back can you go? At which point you think the president's words are going to be used against him? And this was the second time around was more facially neutral. It doesn't mention the same kind of pitfalls of religion they had in the first one. So the courts are saying, Was that enough to sanitize it? Can you erase the trigger words and make it constitutionally sound? I think they made a stronger argument on the government side than they did the first time, saying, listen, you've got to give the president deference on issues of national security. But again, you've got the president's, subordinates and everyone else kind of working against him in that respect. When you have it on the website still listed as a Muslim ban.
Until last week.
Until
Yeah,
last
they
week. And
scrubbed
it's
it.
mentioned to him outright. I mean, talking about the trip abroad, they're going to be watching, as much as we're watching internally in the United States, whether or not there is control over the courts in this country and control over entities that help to investigate.
All right, you guys, we are standing by for the White House press briefing, going to begin any moment.